Excellent. Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Just quick introduction. My name is Emily Vogler, and I'm the Graduate Program Director and the Associate Professor in the Landscape Architecture Department here at RISD. I'll hand it over to Austin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Austin Becker. I'm the chair of the Department of Marine Affairs at the University of Rhode Island, and I also run our graduate certificate in coastal resilience program.
So that's great. All
Excellent.
right. I'll turn it over to you, Emily, for the presentation. But just a heads up for everybody, we'll have a few slides between Emily and Austin. Then the rest of the session we'll leave to a Q&A. So start thinking about your questions and feel free to start typing them in the Q&A section of Zoom. All right, take it away, Emily.
Excellent. Great. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Whoops. Let's see, slideshow. There we go. Excellent. Can you all see okay? Yep.
Yep, it looks great.
Okay, fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining. I see some familiar names who've signed on, so I've met some of you in the previous open houses and had calls. I'm happy that everybody's here today. We're going to be talking specifically about the dual degree program between the Landscape Architecture program here at RISD and the Master of Marine Affairs at URI. So I think, one thing to start off with is we're here right now in Providence, the beautiful city of Providence, and a big part of the way that we approach our program at RISD is thinking about our city, Providence's relationship to the water. And so a lot of our curriculum is focused on this, on the city, but also on the larger relationship to Narragansett Bay. And so we really think of Narragansett Bay as somewhat our lab, where we're able to test ideas and understand what it means to think about design, specifically as it relates to coastal landscapes. And while we're kind of specifically focused on kind of this area, even though in our studios we do travel and we do go elsewhere, we understand that a lot of the issues that we're dealing with here in the Bay are also happening around the world, right? These bigger questions that we're having right now about the impact of climate change on coastal environments, the impact of, who's getting to make decisions about some of our shared coastal and ocean resources, and the impacts of this on trade and economies. And so there's a lot of questions, I think, right now that we're all having about this relationship between land and water and the way that we live in relationship to water. And so we were really excited when we first started to ask these questions of, how do we as designers engage in questions around the coastal environments? And something that comes up, right, is this kind of the reality, which is that these wicked environmental problems require interdisciplinary and creative approaches. And that is the foundation of, I think, a lot of the way that we approach our role as landscape architects is at this kind of nexus, right, of working between the social, the ecological, the human components of the world we live in, but that we also need to be always working in interdisciplinary ways, right? Whether that's working with scientists or working with engineers. And so much of the work that we do as landscape architects is very interdisciplinary in nature. And I think that landscape architects can play a really important role in that. But in some ways, there's only so much that we can do within our landscape architecture education in our curriculum because of the time frame of what we're doing. And so we were really excited to be able to partner with the Marine Affairs Department at URI in order to allow students to get a deeper understanding and a deeper knowledge of some of these issues facing coastal and marine environments. And so we were just really excited to launch this program and to think about the way that this dual degree program can situate and can support students who are interested in landscape architecture, but wanting to get a bit more of the policy and the science and those other aspects of that are really necessary when we're both working in coastal environments, but also when we're working on these interdisciplinary teams. And so we're interested in where and how do we prepare students to go out in the world and to be leaders when it comes to addressing these issues around the coastal environment. So whether it's about design and policy, whether it's about the narratives of how we tell the stories, planning, modeling, thinking about conservation, social equity, climate change, research, experimentation. All of these are important things that we're taking on when we're thinking about the coastal environments. And so we were really excited about the possibility of students having a bit more of the expertise of the kind of marine affairs program to bring that into their landscape architecture degree. And so so I'm just excited to be here in order to talk through the way that we approach coastal environments, but then also specifically for you all to hear from Austin in terms of the way that they're taking on these similar questions and the kind of adjacencies that come out of asking these questions from our different disciplines. Within landscape architecture, one of the main things that we do, and one of the things that I feel like we best equip our students to do, is to think at multiple scales. And for me, when we're working in coastal environments, that's just such an important part of the way that we have to be thinking, right? We have to be able to think at the base scale, for example, to be able to identify different typical conditions that might present themselves, as vulnerabilities or opportunities in the area. But then to be able to zoom into a site scale, to take those bigger questions that we might be asking at the regional scale and to come down to a site scale to say, how do we now address this at the site scale? What does that mean in terms of the physical changes that we could make to the built environment that could help to address those vulnerabilities? Whether that's about taking on issues of flooding, coastal flooding, thinking about the way that we can manipulate the ground to build resilience, to build habitat. And how do we begin to draw that and to visualize that and then to model it in order to be able to understand how to work with it? And then also come down to that scale of the construction of how do we actually now build this, right? So to me, one of the core things that we do as landscape architects is work across these multiple scales, and we try to really equip our students in order to do that. And I think that that's one of those things that that coming into the work of working in coastal environments is extremely important. The other thing we do is think a lot about this idea of cohabitat. So where and how can we create and think about the creation or restoration of coastal habitats, whether that's for aquatic species or avian species that might be dependent on these environments, and then where and how do we think about where that could align with public access, right? So where and how can we design spaces that can both support and enhance the restoration of our coastal environments, but also enhance public access and equitable access to our shorelines? And so these questions to me come down to, yes, a question of design, but also a question of policy, right? Of who's making those decisions and how do we actually implement this work? And so that's another moment where I think this type of knowledge of both the design aspects, but also the policy and the science becomes extremely valuable for students who are wanting to pursue this type of work. And then I think the other part is just about narratives and storytelling of how do we begin to think about how we communicate about climate change, how we communicate about the different ways of these kind of these human and environmental interactions, and how do we use our skills of visual storytelling in order to broaden the conversation, kind of within our disciplines, but with the larger communities. And so these different ways that we can use modeling, mapping, graphics in order to tell some of those stories more effectively. And then how do we test our ideas? One thing is that we, as we model, as we think about different strategies, we often are working with ideas that are physical. And so within our field, within our department, we do a lot of testing in order to be able to say, okay, if we're trying to address erosion, how do we begin to study and test some initial ideas of how that might perform, or how water flow and fluid dynamics might affect the cause of erosion or the sedimentation or deposition. And so these ways that we can begin to visualize and understand how to inform our decision making. And then a lot of what we do in our program is field-based. And so while we do cover some of that within the core of our landscape architecture curriculum, I feel like there's an opportunity for students who are interested in this type of work to be able to expand that by focusing more on this in this dual degree program, right? So whether that's getting out into the field to better understand the science or the hydrology of sites, but I think that this field-based knowledge is an important part of how we begin to understand how we can operate within these coastal environments. And then understanding where and how do we begin to think about stewardship and how communities can participate in the shaping of the coastal environment. And so to me, that's a big part of the way that we think about the coastal, landscape is that it is public, right? And who should be responsible for stewarding this and where and how might there be opportunities where we can both engage communities in that process of stewardship while building sense of place and also helping to restore some of these habitats that have been degraded over time. And then, so ultimately, our hope is that the dual degree program, like I said, is that it helps equip landscape architecture students to have a bit more of a grounding in the science and policy that can allow them to become leaders in this very important field right now. Austin and I have worked closely over the past couple of years in order to think about the curriculum and to think about the structuring of this program. This here is a diagram of how we imagine students moving through the dual degree program. So as many of you know, we have both a 3-year program, which is the MLA 1, and a 2-year program, which is the MLA 2. The way that we imagine students moving through the 3-year program is that they would do the first 2 years at RISD, which we really consider to be our core kind of curriculum. They would then go to URI for 1 year, have an immersive year, and I'll let Austin speak a bit more about the different classes that are offered there. But then in the final year, students would come back to RISD and be able to both work on a major project as well as their thesis and to think about where and how both of their studies, both the previous studies of landscape architecture and the marine affairs can come together into that final project and really inform and exemplify what the benefits, right, of this kind of advanced study could be. And so the same goes for the second year. Students would do 1 year here. They would then go to, or here being RISD, and then 1 year at URI, and then come back to have that final thesis year be a kind of culmination of their studies. And so we feel like this program and this kind of ability to step out of the design education into more of that in-depth marine affairs and then come back is one of the best ways to equip students to be able to think about how that knowledge can get integrated into their work as landscape architects moving forward. So with that, I will pass it over to Austin, who will speak a bit more specifically about the program at URI. Let's see, and I will stop sharing, and I think you should be able to
All
share.
right, and I'll
Great.
start sharing.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we seeing those slides? All right. Great. Thanks, Emily. We've been working together for a number of years now, and really, looking for and enjoying the synergies across our different departments and our different universities. So I'll give you an overview of the Department of Marine Affairs here at the University of Rhode Island. We are located about a half an hour drive south of Providence. I live in Providence, so I drive down to campus most days. But we're not too far away, and you drive right down alongside Narragansett Bay. So just a quick history of the Marine Affairs program. We are the oldest program of marine affairs in the world. We were started, or the concept was formed back in 1966 when a group called the Stratton Commission, which was established by U.S. Congress, got together and was drafting the Stratton Report, which was an analysis of the coastal and ocean challenges that the U.S. was facing at the time. And through that process, the leads of that effort really recognized how important social science was in the creation of policy to address the country and the world's ocean and coastal challenges. And through that, they developed this concept for a graduate program in marine affairs, which would have a more social science focus as opposed to oceanography and the natural and physical science side. So our program was started in 1969 with the MMA, which is the Master of Marine Affairs. And that was designed to be a professional degree program, mostly for mid-career folks who wanted to come back and get some more knowledge and experience around policy, government, regulatory issues to help inform the policy challenges that they were working on. And over time, the department grew. We were first housed in the geography department here at URI. Eventually, the geography department turned into the Department of Marine Affairs. And we added a Master of Arts in Marine Affairs in the late 70s. In the 80s, we added an undergraduate program, both a BA and a BS. In the late 90s, we added a PhD program. And then we've been developing these joint degrees with other universities around the state, including Roger Williams, where we have a joint degree with their law program. Students do a JD and an MMA. And then we've launched this joint degree program with RISD a few years back. So we now offer these 3 graduate programs, and the one that we're talking about today is the one in the middle, the Master of Marine Affairs, or the MMA. But we have in our program about 45 graduate students who are pursuing each of these degrees. The MA is more of a traditional research-based degree. The MMA is more of a professional degree, and then our PhD program. We also have a number of graduate certificates in the university that students do alongside their master's degree. And those are available as well to students who enroll in the joint degree with RISD. So the most relevant one is probably the graduate certificate in coastal resilience. But there are a number of others, including community planning, GIS, science writing and rhetoric, and others. And I can talk more about those if there are questions at the end. So the Marine Affairs program is really focused on the finding solutions to the world's coastal and ocean problems from a human dimensions perspective. So we are very much a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary program. We work a lot with our colleagues in the natural and physical sciences, and their work informs our work and vice versa. But we are primarily dealing with the people problems of the coasts and the oceans. So I like to think of us as an environmental studies program that is really focused on coastal and ocean issues. A lot of people work in the public policy realm, but we have anthropologists and lawyers and sociologists and folks who are trained to be interdisciplinary. And many of us, like myself, work very closely with ocean engineers and oceanographers to help do applied work. So it's really hard for our department being so interdisciplinary. We have about 10 or 11 faculty here to really narrow down our research areas because it's very wide. But we did force ourselves to do that, and we came up with these 8. And you can read them here, but they range from conservation issues to ports and shipping issues, climate adaptation, fisheries, spatial planning. A lot of folks, we have a couple of folks working on wind energy issues, but there are also research areas that are outside of these. But these are really the 8 core thematic areas for us. Our faculty work both in the US and internationally. And at any given time, we might have projects going on in any of these areas or more. But this is just some examples of work that's been done by our faculty over the last 10 years or so in different areas around the world. And our graduate students work in all of those different 8 thematic areas and more. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of students that have overlapped with the type of work that goes on in landscape architecture at RISD. So the first example is from Jose Menendez, who was a student a few years back, who was working with another student who came out of RISD, Peter Stempel, to look for ways to better visualize the outputs of numerical ocean risk models. So what we're looking at here is Barrington, Rhode Island, and some projections of sea level rise and storm surge. And what these students did was they built the 3D models that you see and aligned those 3D models with a coding structure that would automatically generate these different colors to represent the risk to these structures with different amounts of flooding. So as we look at the advancement of flooding in different scenarios, those structures reflect those risk values as that flooding increases. So this is very much a collaborative effort across oceanography, ocean engineering, and leverage the kinds of hard skills that are being developed through a program like RISD's landscape architecture program. So this was using, I think it was Rhino and Grasshopper were two of the programs that they were using here. And this is just another example of that kind of work where these students were trying to find ways to help visualize these outputs, which on the oceanography side were just graphs, right? It's just graphs of flood projections, or maybe it was an overlay of flooding on a map, just a 2D overlay. And so they were trying to bring some of these risk projections to life in these different ways. Just another quick example. So this was a student who was actually doing her PhD, but she was looking at how users of the coast think about the meaning of those places and how these different locations can influence how people think about these places. And I think this also lends itself to the kind of work that a lot of folks in landscape architecture are interested in as you're thinking about designing coastal spaces. So here we have a real research study trying to better understand how people think about places and what's important to them that can then be utilized by the folks who are doing the design as they think about the best way to design a space to best represent how people are going to actually interact with and use that space. So in the program, we have 5 required courses for the MMA degree. So that's a marine science and ocean uses course, and this is really an introduction to ocean science. So it's a little bit of marine biology, a little bit of oceanography, some climate science, some plate tectonics, learning about tides and currents and coastal erosion. It's an overview of a lot of the different sciences that people use when they're studying the coasts. International ocean law, which actually shapes a lot of US domestic law. Our marine affairs seminar, which I'm currently teaching, and this is an opportunity to learn about all of the different research that our faculty are working on in the program. So each of our faculty give a short lecture and then are interviewed by the students in the class. And it also is a way to help students understand what their program is going to look like and how to line things up and what the milestones are and really get oriented to the graduate program. We have an economics of marine resources course and then a coastal zone law course, which is a new addition to the required courses, but is very relevant to coastal design, because this is really where you learn about what is and isn't feasible and what some of the boundaries and restrictions and opportunities might be as you think about ways to design along the edge. So on our website, you can see this table of the degree requirements, and I'll show you this in a minute, but you can follow this column here. So most folks in the MMA do the program in 2 or 3 semesters. There are those 5 required courses that I mentioned. There are then an additional 6 electives, 6 credits of electives, which is 2 courses. And then 6 credits from RISD would transfer in to satisfy the MMA degree, and then there's a 3-credit major project. So essentially, you're taking the 5 required courses plus 2 electives, so 7 courses total, and a major project. So just an overview of what some of our electives are, and these vary year to year, depending on what faculty we have. But this gives you, most of these are offered either every year or every other year. So there's a pretty wide variety of electives. And then, so one elective course needs to be taken within Marine Affairs, so that those are represented here. And then the other elective can be taken within Marine Affairs or really anywhere in the university. And we've seen that slide already. And I think that's what I've got. So I'll stop the share here and we can answer any questions that folks have.
Great. Thank you both. It does look like we have a couple questions in the Q&A, and I encourage everyone else to start putting your questions in now as well. The first question, this person's curious what the cohort might look like in the final year. With the non-integrated design, students graduated, would the classes be made up mostly of the MLA plus MMA students?
So essentially for the students who take a year to go to URI and then come back to RISD's landscape architecture program, they would still be integrated with landscape architecture students. It would just be the next year of students who have moved through the program, right? And so essentially they would come back into the RISD cohort, but have skipped a year. So their cohort would have graduated the year that they were doing the MMA, and then they would get integrated into the next year's cohort. So it would still be in a cohort of other landscape architecture students and any other students who are doing the MMA in that same year, but it wouldn't be entirely separate cohort. That answers the question.
Great. And then how many students are expected to be accepted for the MLA MMA program?
Austin, I don't know if you want to answer that or you want me to.
Sure, I can answer it. So we have a total of about 45 students in our program. We have a long history with our joint degree program with Roger Williams, and we typically have 3 or 4 students a year in the joint degree, and I would expect that we would probably have 2 or 3 students a year in the RISD joint degree.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be, kind of our hope would be 2 to 3, just so that a group can go through that process that I just described earlier together and be able to also support each other in that dual degree experience.
Perfect. All right. We still have plenty of time, so feel free to type your questions in.
So, oh, okay. Sure. Yes, I can talk more about the coastal resilience and community planning certificates. So the way the certificate programs at URI work is they work kind of like a minor does in an undergraduate degree. They are a collection of courses that represent a thematic area. So the coastal resilience certificate is 4 courses, and many of those courses are satisfied by courses you would be taking anyway in the MMA program. But all the courses can be double counted. So, it's really those elective choices that you're making that can earn you the certificate. Same goes for community planning. I can't remember offhand if that one is 15 credits or 12 credits. But you would be making course selections in order to satisfy both degree programs at the same time. Yep. So next, yeah, I can.
Just on that, Austin, with the certificate programs, those are separate from the MMA. Is that correct? And so that is something that students would do that would not be related to the dual degree program, though, if they were to choose.
It's something you can do in addition to the dual degree program. I think fairly easily, depending on which certificate you are interested in. Certainly, the coastal resilience certificate is pretty straightforward to do at the same time as the joint degree. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So then a student would potentially come out of the program with a dual degree in landscape architecture, marine affairs, and a certificate in coastal
In
resilience.
coastal
Okay,
resilience.
got
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Great,
Yep.
great,
All
excellent.
right.
I think there was a question about where students might go after graduation. I think that there are many different possible paths that students could take with the dual degree program. Obviously, there are a lot of landscape architecture firms who are really specializing in kind of focusing on coastal resilience issues. And so I could definitely see students who are interested in that type of work being able to take that dual degree and have those extra qualifications in order to contribute to an office like that if they were interested in private practice. I think in terms of the public realm, I absolutely do feel like there's opportunities there as well, whether that's public or the nonprofit realm. I feel like whether that is working in the capacity of, kind of city governments or regional planning authorities or nonprofits that are specializing in coastal issues. I know that we have some students from our program, just that are pure landscape architects who do go on to do more of the public realm, kind of, or the public work. But I think that it's going to be a matter of having the dual degree, being able to better situate students in order to participate in whether it's firms or whether it's the public practice that is a bit more between the kind of design and planning and policy, right? Which I think is a unique kind of opportunity for students coming out of this program.
Yeah, I mean, we see this as a very powerful combination because, RISD's program is, you know, best in the world at training students to be on the design thinking side, on the utilization of those tools and developing expertise in using products to do design. Marine Affairs is the leading department in the world in the regulatory and policy side. And so coming into a job and saying, hey, I've got both of these things, like I understand how to do the design, I can make the things and I've got the vision and the creativity, but I've also got the grounding in the policy and regulatory side to understand what is actually going to be feasible for whatever application we're looking at, right? So we really do see this as a very powerful combination of degrees.
Mhm. Great. All right. I have another question in the Q&A. If you're not accepted into the MLA, MMA option, would your application still be considered for the RISD MLA degree?
Mhm. Absolutely. And Jen, you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that when you are filling out your application, because of the nature of the sequencing of when you would apply for one program or the other, you do not necessarily need to apply for the dual degree program at the time of applying to RISD, right? You can apply to RISD, and then within your first year, we would have another similar type of information session, which could then allow for you to prepare your application for the dual degree program. And so, for example, I think your deadline for your applications, Austin, are coming up in January. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially you would apply to RISD for whichever MLA program best suits your background. And then, if you are, and then you would, kind of that following January, if you're in the 1 year program or the 2 year program, or the 2 years from then, if you're in the 3 year program, you would then apply for the dual degree and apply for the MMA program. And so that's the way we have it set up right now. So it's not required that you apply at the time of applying to RISD, that you apply for the dual degree program.
Right. It's two separate application processes. So you need to apply to URI separately from RISD.
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
Are there any alternative sequencing options, i.e., ability to take courses in the summer or complete the MMA after completing the MLA?
Mhm. I think I would defer some of those questions to Austin, but I feel like we at some point did think of the MMA as coming after students completed their MLA. But one of the reasons why we landed where we did in terms of the sequencing is because we really feel like the joint kind of thesis and major project So the thesis being in landscape architecture, the major project coming from from the Marine Affairs, and that joint kind of thesis year allowed for students to integrate both what they learned from landscape architecture and also marine affairs into that final project. And we feel like that was a real strength of the sequencing as it is now. But with that said, I feel like there is flexibility depending on students' kind of trajectory, right, in terms of whether or not that year comes at the end or in that in-between period is my understanding. Austin, I don't know if you feel the same way about that.
There is flexibility. We've kind of laid out what we think would work best, but there is flexibility if that doesn't work for people. We don't have our department does not have many, if any, summer courses. But you can do your major project credits in the summer. We're trying to develop some more summer courses, so it's possible that in the future there might be a couple of options there. But right now we don't have any in the summer. But there is flexibility in terms of phasing.
That's great. I can help answer this from the RISD side, but what financial aid and funding does RISD and URI offer? On the RISD side, all graduate students, it doesn't matter if you're international or domestic, are considered for fellowships and assistantships. Those awards vary based on merit and need, and it's awarded at the point of acceptance. So with your acceptance letter, you'll receive an award letter as well. Domestic students will fill out the FAFSA, and both domestic and international students will need to fill out the RISD institutional financial aid form. That is in the applicant status portal after you submit your application. And then there are opportunities for campus employment and other ways to fund your graduate education while at RISD as well. Anything else to add to that, Emily, from the RISD side?
No, I think I'll let Austin jump in on the URI side.
Yeah, on the URI side, by attending RISD for a year, that qualifies you for the in-state tuition rate for URI. So it's a reduced tuition. I don't know what the number is right now, but you would get the in-state rate for tuition, and then there are on-campus opportunities for hourly work. We don't have too many assistantship opportunities for this program at this point anyway, where I've been working on that. I'm hoping that I can create some new assistantship possibilities, like possibly being a TA we have an undergraduate landscape architecture program. So this is something I've been trying to develop, but at this point, it's in-state tuition and then the potential for some hourly work on campus. There are occasionally some other things pop up, but there aren't any formal programs.
Mm-hmm. But I do feel like one of the big advantages of doing the dual degree is the opportunity to get the in-state tuition also at the time of going and applying for URI.
Yep. Which it's somewhere around 16 or 17,000 a year, I think.
Yeah.
Perfect. Are there separate applications for the MLA MMA program versus the standard MLA program?
Yeah, so essentially, like I mentioned before, you would just apply for the MLA program, and that has the kind of standard application that's written out on the website in terms of portfolio and letter of intent. And then you would separately apply for the MMA program. And I don't know, Austin, if you want to speak to that, but I think the requirements they're different. And I think obviously once you were within the landscape architecture program at RISD, by applying to the MMA, you would automatically be applying for the dual degree program. And so we would expect in whatever letter of intent or whatever it is that you're using to communicate about your desire, that you're talking about the desire to do that dual degree or what it is specifically about that you're interested in.
Yeah, and on the URI side, it's the standard MMA application, but again, you would indicate in your statement that you're interested in the dual degree.
And remind me, Austin, it's a letter, it's one letter that you write or like.
It's a personal statement, two reference letters and transcripts.
Yeah. And so the lift is much less for applying for the MMA than it is for the landscape architecture degree in terms of the requirements.
Any more questions? I've got some queued up here just in case.
Okay.
Let's see here. Do applicants need prior experience in marine science or policy, or is the program designed to support students come from primarily design-focused background or vice versa?
On the URI side, we are very much an interdisciplinary program. So the kind of the normal pathway to the MMA is you have to have 3 years of professional experience before you would be considered for the MMA program. Without that, you would be looking at the MA, the Master of Arts program. But no, there's no prerequisites for marine science training.
Great. Let's see here. See, what qualities or backgrounds make someone a strong fit for the dual degree program?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I think one of the things that I love about our MLA program is that we get students from so many different backgrounds that come together to create our cohort of students. And I find it just interesting because, sometimes we get students who come in with design backgrounds and they have some level of skills. Sometimes we get students coming in from liberal arts backgrounds with a very different set of skills. But I think that, in the end of the day, what matters is students' kind of passion, to learn and desire to be taking on these challenges and to figure out where best they could situate themselves within this conversation. Around our coastal environments. And so I think that the nature of the dual degree program has enough flexibility to where students who come in who, let's say, are excelling in the visualization and the design can really find a kind of stronghold in that, but then also have the policy and planning to like back them up. But also it could be great for students who might come into a design program, but actually find themselves like, okay, I can do that, but I really feel more drawn to writing about this, right? Or to thinking about policy and law. And so I feel like what I appreciate about the dual degree is the opportunity for students to really identify for themselves where is it within this broad conversation around the kind of future of our coastal environments do I want to situate myself and find my strengths in terms of being able to contribute to this conversation. And so I think to me there's not a specific background that would better equip students. I think it's more about the kind of passion and the interest and the desire to contribute.
Great. All right. We have another question that came in. What kinds of field-based research or monitoring do MMA students typically engage in at URI?
Yeah, so it's a broad range, and so the joint degree students with Roger Williams Law Program, they tend to do major projects that are focused on some aspect of domestic or international law. We have joint degree students who are our MMA students who are coming out of different military branches, like especially the Coast Guard. We tend to always have 2 or 3 Coast Guard students who are in officer tracks in the Coast Guard, and they come back for a year to do a master's degree, and they might be interested in fisheries management or enforcement issues, and so they may look at some aspect of that. I've had students do projects on I don't know, there's a really broad range of things, but working on different types of commercial vessels at sea and the different characteristics that folks have and moving between sectors, between, say, the tall ships industry and the commercial towing industry. Like, what are the characteristics of sailors who do one and then the other? So there's really, I mean, there is no typical. It is really tailored to the interests of each of the students, and those interests are pretty wide ranging.
Mhm. And I think just to add to that, within our program at RISD, we have a handful of field-based courses, whether it's field ecology or, we have, I forget the name of the course right now that the college Hope is teaching. It's like bogs, swamps, and wetlands, and where there's a lot of field work doing kind of research into wetlands. But I think that what's interesting to me about the joint degree program is that, while we cover we cover some aspects of research within landscape architecture, but obviously within marine affairs, there's other types of research, right? So Austin mentioned some of the social research, right, of going out and doing interviews or questionnaires, also doing more kind of field-based research of monitoring that I think my understanding is that there is some ability with some of those elective courses that if you were interested in bringing some of those field research methods in, whether they're social or biological field methods, that it's something that you could focus on with those elective credits that you have there, and then find a way in your final thesis to bring that extra level of research into your final thesis project, right? And I think that to me, that's an amazing opportunity because yeah, just because it equips you to understand more about how to ask some of these questions and how to do the research that could help to then ultimately inform those design decisions.
Yeah, so the research that our faculty are doing is pretty much all human dimension side. So and there are, so field-based research might be something like going to Block Island and conducting interviews with folks about their perceptions of the wind turbines that are offshore from Block Island. Do they like them? Do they not like them? Is it going to impact their decisions about where to vacation, or does it interfere with their view shed? Do they think it's going to impact property values, or those kinds of things? But they tend to be surveys, like online surveys, interviews, focus groups, anthropology methods. Those are the kinds of research projects that our faculty are doing, and students have opportunities to engage with those projects depending on what their interests are. But we don't do a lot of like coastal ecology work in our department.
Mhm. Austin, just on that, for the students, 6 credits though that they have as the electives, are those classes that they could take more in the kind of coastal ecology if they were interested in focusing on that aspect of things? Is
Yeah.
that possible?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. Because URI has an amazing kind of like in terms of coastal ecology, a lot of amazing faculty there that also specialize in that. And so there might be a way that students could bring that in if that was an aspect they were interested in.
Yep.
Okay, great.
We have another question. Would applicants need to identify a professor or a research group for the field-based research at URI?
So it's not a requirement that you identify. This would be a major advisor, and that this person would be advising on that 3-credit major project. You don't need to identify that person in advance. But I think the way this probably would work is that while you're in that first year at RISD, we would be talking already, and so you would be learning about the faculty that you might want to work with at URI, but it's not a requirement that you identify that person in advance.
Mhm. And I would just add that, one of the things, that final thesis year when you're working on the major project that Austin mentioned and also your thesis, I think what could be a real strength of that is having, whoever that advisor is, be able to contribute to that major project, but also I imagine that major project would align with whatever your thesis is. And so you would also have your thesis advisors from landscape architecture advising you as well, right? And I think we're very much open to sharing, right, kind of to having those conversations across our faculty. And so that it's more of a collaborative effort to help guide you in whatever that question is that you have, and to do joint discussions, joint reviews, or whatever it is that would help you to be able to think about the integration of these 2 degrees. Because I think what's important is that we don't want it to be like, oh, you're RISD, you do this, you go to URI, you do that, and then you're like kind of left, without understanding that integration. And our hope is that final year is to be able to collaborate to help each individual student to really think through that next level of integration into their own practice.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. All right. We're nearing the end of our time here. If there's any last minute questions, feel free to add them now. While I just have another, couple of questions queued up. Oh, we have a question here. In addition to interviewing, what opportunities do students have to practice writing, communicating for different audiences, i.e., scientists, policymakers, and community members? And how does the program teach students to adapt their language and methods across those contexts?
Yeah, so this is really course dependent. So different courses in the Marine Affairs program approach this in different ways, but most of our courses do tend to be more writing and communication heavy. So, in my course, I teach a course called Port Planning and Policy, for example, and in that course, the assignments are a series of policy memos written for different audiences. So, we're learning about kind of governance and management of seaports. And so the students write a policy brief for a federal agency. They write a policy brief for a port organization, another one for an environmental group, right? That's all based on a case study of a certain port that they might have interest in. So that's a strong focus of that particular course, and those kinds of assignments come into other courses as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting question. And I think I think it's really our hope is that this, so much of what we need to be thinking about is this when we're dealing with these kind of complex science and engineering issues is that translation, right? Of like where and how do we communicate these issues to the general public or to different audiences? And so I think it's a really kind of sharp question in that. And I think that I find myself as a landscape architect, I work on a range of projects throughout this region. Some of them are coastal, some of them more related to rivers and dams. And I feel like so often we're in that position of having to help translate between complex engineering and hydrology and hydraulics models and HEC-RAS models and the general public. And so finding these different ways, whether it's visual, like, Austin shared some of those amazing images of coastal flooding, whether it's visual or whether it's through written words, like where and how can we help to advance these conversations and to create more of that ability for us to communicate across the different disciplines or across the public and the kind of more specialized disciplines. And so anyways, I think it's a great question. I think it's important to be aware of those questions of audiences and to think through that in the way that you're approaching your work.
Fantastic. All right. If that is it, if there's no other further questions, I just want to conclude by saying, if anybody thinks of anything afterwards, you're welcome to email us at admissions@risd.edu. But Emily and Austin, if people have specific questions for each of you, is it okay for them to reach out directly?
Yep. And I'll put my email in the chat here. But yeah, feel free. Happy to chat more.
Yes, absolutely. For me as well. Happy to, further discuss. I know I've spoken with some people about the dual degree, but any other questions that you might have in the process of applying or of how you would move through the different programs, please feel free to reach out.
Yes, thank you. And we look forward to seeing everybody's application. Again, the RISD application deadline is January 5th. So you've got, I think, 3 more weeks left. So we're here to help. But with that, I just want to thank Austin and Emily for your time today, for this morning. And yeah, that will do it for us.
Yeah, excellent. And just just as you're working on your RISD application, feel free in your letter to write that your intention is to pursue, is that you have a desire to pursue the dual degree program. And that's super helpful for us to know that as we're reviewing applications, because we're really, we feel like this dual degree program is just super powerful, and we're really hopeful, that some of you will be interested in pursuing it. So, so please, indicate that in your letter, and feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions.
Perfect. Great. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks, Austin. Bye-bye.
Yep.